Hello and welcome everyone to the very first session of the Vixio Strategy Booster webinar series. We know that compliance teams today are under more pressure than ever, and that's why we've created this series to help you sharpen your strategy and turn screen time into real strategic advantage. Each session is designed to be short, focused, and practical, providing clear and actionable steps you can start putting into practice instantly. In this session, we'll unpack the common challenge of keeping up with complex, fast-evolving regulatory landscape in the payment space. So now let's get into it. I'm delighted to hand over to today's moderator, Adam Parkinson, to kick off the conversation.
Hi everybody, and welcome to our latest Vixio Regulatory Intelligence webinar. This is going to be talking about adapting at the speed of change, looking at some of the key challenges for compliance teams trying to keep up. Things like the sheer pace of change, dealing with the issue of information overload, identifying what to prioritize in your compliance activities. We've got a great panel, so we're going to press ahead with it. We'll have hopefully time for a little bit of audience Q&As at the end, so do let us know if you have any questions. But first, maybe we'll do some introductions. So my name is Adam Parkinson. I am the editor of the Insights team on the payments side of Vixio's operations. I'm joined today by a great panel. First of all, Franz Wiwanto, Managing Director of APAC at Flywire. Hi, Franz. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. And Kat Cloud, Head of Government Relations at SumSub. Hi, Kat.
Hello.
And finally, Vixio's own John Gidler, Head of Global Regulatory Research and Analysis. So now that we all know each other, let's jump straight in. First of all, one of the main things that we're going to be thinking about is risks for firms in getting compliance wrong. So maybe if we talk about manual tracking, first of all, what are the big risks for firms that are relying solely on manual tracking to keep up to date with their compliance obligations? Kat, if I maybe come to you first on this one.
Yeah, of course. I think, especially if you're looking at, even if it's just a regional based role or a country specific based role or even a global role, I think the biggest challenge that we all face is the speed at which regulatory change happens. So especially we're in September, we're all coming back from summer holidays, and these the next couple of months where we start to see a lot of consultation responses are published, a lot of requests for input, different areas where the regulators are reaching out back to industry because they've also come back from their summer holidays. So now is a really crucial time, but even if you're a team of 10 people, you're bound to miss something because there are so many things that are popping up. So one of the biggest risks with manual tracking is that you are going to miss a key consultation. And there's so many tools out there, be it LinkedIn, be it yourselves, but there are different tools that are available. So like my biggest concern anytime I'm looking at a manual tracking system is to just figure out how or what other mechanisms can we use to try and identify these so we minimize the risk that we're going to miss out on a consultation that could be really impactful to the business, could be really impactful to our growth plans. If it's, let's say, a new market we're looking to enter, those are the areas that you really need to start focusing on. And that's the biggest risk that I personally see with manual tracking.
Absolutely. Yeah, is there anything that you'd add to that, Franz?
Yeah, I think Kat is right, and I think just to add to what Kat mentioned, I think there's also two other issues as pertains to manual tracking, right? I think number one is very resource intensive. Manual compliance tracking actually requires a lot of resource. It's often repetitive. It's a low value sort of task where you input all the differences into a Excel spreadsheet. I think, if we have automated tracking in place, you can actually divert those resources to higher value activities like actual risk assessment, risk advisory, or managing stakeholders relationships, right? So that's my first point. Second point is that I think manual tracking, again, presents a scalability issue. The more jurisdiction you have means you have more manual trackers in those different countries. And as our payment volumes increases, or maybe we sign more partners, more clients, add more jurisdictions, it's not going to be sustainable, right? Yeah. And what it means is it's going to increase our risk exposure as well, because like what Kat mentioned, we might miss deadlines. There's going to be more human errors.
Yeah, it's a real issue of kind of practicality, isn't it? Things get missed. People have to do this slightly dull task, and that can lead to issues. So kind of moving on from there, in terms of whether you're operating manually or in an automated way, you need to capture an awful lot of information. How can teams manage to do that without suffering from information overload? Perhaps, Franz, if I come to you first this time.
I always go back to my favorite saying, right? My favorite word, risk-based, right? Everything's risk-based. We just have to prioritize those updates that impacts the core business operations, focus on those jurisdictions which are higher risk, and focus on those which are more critical to the compliance areas, right? Like data privacies or sanctions or money launderings, or even licensing, right? And what I would advise is we got to assign all the different updates a risk rating, whether it's a high risk, medium risk, or low risk event. And then with that, you can prioritize and set internal deadlines, right? And dedicate your resource accordingly.
Yeah. Kat, is that a similar sort of thing that you would answer to that question?
Completely. I think the one area that we really try and focus on is also, can we reuse anything? So a lot of times, like, because we are a global company, we will have a consultation on crypto in APAC, and then we'll have a very similar consultation on crypto in LATAM. And one of the things that we do as a team is we sit there and we go to our legal or to our subject matter experts and say, we think it's good for us. Like, this is, both of them are looking at crypto and its implications for AML. We think we can copy and paste or reuse some material from some of these other consultations to help, to, exactly as Franz said, like, you have to take a risk-based approach. So here we are, we're saying, okay, we need to respond to both these consultations, but I only have one subject matter expert on crypto. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, these are both important, but we're going to try and maximize, but also minimize the amount of work that that individual needs to do so we can meet those different deadlines and we can continue to provide those consultation responses, but we're not overly burdening ourselves. And we're also not forcing us to read a 50-page, if not longer, consultation response. We can kind of take out the key elements of it that impact our business, and then we can use our already built internal responses, internal answers, internal knowledge to generate the responses that we need to do. So it's definitely, completely agree with Franz. Like, we always have to take a risk-based approach, but we also then kind of go that extra layer and say, what can we reuse that we already know we've used in the past that can save us time, but still allow us to meet these deadlines and provide really robust and thoughtful answers to the consultations as well. We also really look at things, and we use a lot of our trade associations. So we can't respond to every single consultation. So when we see them, we'll also have an internal discussion and say, okay, I know that this trade association is going to be responding to this consultation. Do we want our own separate response, or are we okay with just letting them provide the response? We always also have that conversation as well, because exactly like I said, we are not a team of 100 people. We can't respond to every single thing. So it's as Franz said, it's taking that risk-based approach, but then kind of having those conversations internally on a range of different things and saying, I'm going to utilize all of these other things that I have that I know I can rely on to provide or to respond to those activities. So I can make sure that my team is not burdened and that we're still able to take care of the business as usual activities that we need to take care of, but we're still able to kind of keep an eye on compliance changes, keep an eye on regulatory changes, and still have those relationships with regulators.
Fantastic, yeah. And kind of on that note of making the most of resources, John, if I bring you in here, is this an area that you would think is particularly important?
Yeah, I think so. I think completely agree with the term risk-based. Risk-based approach is going to be imperative for manual tracking and kind of staying confident. But I think also prioritization is key, and aligning to what Kat was saying. Not all updates mean the same thing, but there are several updates that come across that could mean similar implications across regions. So it's imperative that businesses take a step back and kind of assess a consultation or a new policy statement and kind of understand where are the synergies. And at Vixio, we've seen time and time again, and we support clients, but with that scenario of having a compliance leader based in different regions, and actually they're working on very similar priorities, and actually creating synergies there is really important. I think also regional tagging, so kind of having a systematic approach to themes, and having essentially a tagging system or a regional dashboard. So actually when things come in, you can triage and work out actually the team in the UK are working on something very similar to what maybe the team in the US or other regions are working through. It just helps cut through the noise from our experience, both in industry and working at Vixio. It definitely supports in businesses kind of understanding what's coming down the track, and also what Franz was saying around redeploying resource. I think is going to be really key, because there's no benefit in being busy for being busy if the policies are already drafted across the pond as such.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding, right? I think at Flywire, what we have done is I chair the APAC Business Steering Committee. So in that committee, you've got all the regional heads of marketing, heads of businesses, heads of operations, heads of payments are all there. Head of HR is there as well. But however, when it comes to compliance, I don't not only have the regional head, I have all the different country heads attending those meetings, and they are full standing members of those committee as well, right? And every month they will give us updates on all the different regulatory changes happening in those countries and jurisdiction. And very often, I think when we have this big group come together to discuss, I find that there's a lot of synergies, and it doesn't even have to come from within compliance, right? It can come from a business person, it can come from a HR person, because he or she would have said, oh yeah, in a previous job, he or she has seen that, he has done that, and if you can then set up a working group, cross-functional working group easily. So again, the key is communication and just be open.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, a theme that's coming through is definitely the making the most of the resources that you have, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that compliance person who's having all the ideas. It can come from anywhere, and that leads quite neatly into the next question, which is about how different business functions, so compliance, legal, risk, whoever it might be, how can they work together to make sure that regulatory intelligence flows from that side of the business into strategy and execution and the commercial side. Kat, if I maybe go to you first on that one.
Yep. So I think there's a multitude of ways, and I love the example that Franz gave just now, and for a response to the previous one, like steering committees are definitely really good. But actually, one of the things that I genuinely love about my role being in government relations team is we sit at the intersection between the sales team and the legal team. So I am not a lawyer by background. But I can sit there and I can read regulation and I can interpret it and understand it. So what I have a lot of times is I'll have meetings every single month with my different sales region leads, as well as my head of legal. And we will have those conversations and say, okay, we see that there's a lot of regulatory attention on crypto within this specific region or within this specific country. What are the sales team? What are they saying? What are the conversations they're having? What are the prospects or the clients that we currently have? What are they saying? So it really is, as we were just mentioning in the last question, it's about communication. It's sitting down together and saying, this is what we're seeing from a legal perspective, which can be very like black and white. And then this is what we're seeing from a sales perspective, which is more in that gray area. And then I will always come in kind of more of that strategic thinking of, okay, we understand the regulator is interpreting the rules in this way, or they plan to put out a consultation asking these types of questions. Let's understand that we want to remain in compliance with any law, but also at the same token, we don't want to overly burden ourselves, and we don't want to build and interpret this in a way that's going to negatively impact the business. So I always try and take both sides of it and say, from a strategic perspective, we need to be looking at it in this way. And if legal disagrees, we then always say, okay, because we've built a relationship with the regulator, let's go and ask them for clarification, or let's go to our trade association and see how they're interpreting this. So it really is that sharing of knowledge, and it's relying on those different business functions. It's saying, okay, like my sales guys, you're having the day-to-day conversations. You are the ones seeing what the firms are thinking, how they're interpreting it, be it a large global firm to a small fintech startup. You're having those types of conversations to my legal team, who is having the very kind of standard legal conversations. But it also then includes things like, okay, let's talk about the strategy. So the strategy team, how does this and our interpretation of this rule or our relationship with this regulator, how is this going to impact our wider company strategy? Do we need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, it looks like they're going to ban crypto in this country. crypto is one of our biggest businesses. What do we need to do? How do we need to rethink that strategy? Or what can we start to do today to make sure that we're not too impacted later on down the road? So I always look at it as we kind of sit at the epicenter, and it's our responsibility to share that knowledge across the different teams of the organization. And I find even teams that may not necessarily find this information useful, I still send it to them, because you never know. You could get a random individual in a completely not necessarily top team that I would speak to come and say, oh, actually, I've heard this really interesting tidbit from one of my contacts within the industry, or I have a relationship with this regulator. I could help us build out that conversation and see if we can get a clearer answer, things like that. So we do a newsletter every single month. Then we also do, for all of our clients, we do a compliance digest every month as well. And that one actually is, I'd argue, is a little bit more useful, because we send that directly to our client saying, hey, this is all the stuff that's going on. A mix of like, this is the activities we've been doing, as well as these are some kind of like regulatory updates that we think are useful for you to understand. And a lot of times our clients respond to it and they say, oh, can we have a bit more information on this? Or, oh, we've actually been working on this as well. This is how we're interpreting that consultation or that regulation, things like that. So it's not just internal. It's also really important to have these conversations externally, be it with your clients, with your partners, or even just in a trade association setting, because you're not the only one facing these questions. You're probably not the only one facing these challenges. So speak to other people internally, externally, as much as you can, because knowledge is power. We're all trying to make the best of this. We're all trying to understand the regulation. So I'd say speak to your friends.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Franz, is there anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Kat. And I would also add that, we got to try to foster a collaborative and compliance culture. I know it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. But what I always advocate is, we got to incentivize compliance by, including compliance element to the bonus calculations and promotion, assessment of the individuals, employees in the company, right? There's also have to be clawback mechanism, right? If you bring in a risky deal and 1 year later down the road the whole deal imploded, some parts of the bonus should be clawed back and returned to the company, right? There are many other ways to foster that great culture, including training of non-compliant staff. Every year, I always ask my compliance team to train everyone in APAC on what is compliance, as well as making them understand that compliance is not just a responsibility of the compliance department. It is the compliance. It's a responsibility of every individual in the company, right? You're accountable to the work you do, right? You got to make sure that the work you do is legal, right? You can't just outsource it to legal. Outsource to compliance doesn't make sense at all. And have everyone understand that compliance department is there not as a policeman, not as an investigator, but rather as a partner for growth with the business, right? Feel free to share problems that you encounter in the business side, escalate to the compliance, and the compliance folks would analyze it for you, tell you the risks, tell you the rewards, right? And ultimately, if you decide to do the business, you own the risk in the first line, right? Where compliance is on the second line, they just playing a more advisory role is what I always advocate. And another advice I always give my team is that involve legal and compliance as early as you can, and not just at the final stage before launch, right? Best is involve them at the prototyping stage, right, where everybody would have the same sort of information and have more time to think through, right? We are in it together as one company. It's not me versus them. It's not business versus compliance. No, it's just one company against the world, right? That's all I want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that sense of compliance being just part of the whole, and it's not that policeman that you mentioned there. It's a totally different way of thinking about it. And that's kind of
one more thing I just remembered because of my own experience is that very often in not fly wire, but in my past experience, I really hate it when I get compliance advice where it's just a copy and paste job, from regulations, right? And how regulations are worded, it's very legalistic. So in order to make sure that information flow quickly in a very intelligent and easy to understand format. I think how compliance adds value is to simplify those English, right? Draw it in a diagram if possible. If not, put it in a very simple layman English, right? Because not everyone is a lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that accessibility of the information that everybody in the business needs to make sure they're acting in the appropriate kind of way. John, if I just
just to jump in. I think like completely echoing what both of you are saying. I think I'm a firm believer, and most people probably have heard this before, but compliance should be an enabler in businesses. But also, I think from what we're seeing at Vixio, as well as the evolution of what a true compliance culture is, as Fran says, as early on as product inception, compliance should be involved. And it's a positive trend from Vixio's standpoint that we're seeing customers that are actually signing up for our horizon scanning packages, but also product teams interested in signing up, because that allows that conduit to have an open conversation. So but the true benefit and the true reward of having a compliance culture is the compliance function being an enabler to business, because ultimately a business wants to make money. They want to be commercially driven. And if you have compliance, as you said, kind of siloed away as the blocker to revenue, it's never a successful metric, and also ends up typically with fines later down the track when knee-jerk reactions or decisions are made, maybe without compliance's sight till it's too late.
Yeah, it's that aspect of compliance being part of every aspect of it, and just something that's baked in rather than off to one side. So, having kind of talked about the things and the challenges that we're seeing, what are we move on to looking forward, what are the key regulatory themes that are coming down the line that are going to dominate the rest of this year and moving into 2026, and that compliance teams and the wider business should be aware of right now? John, maybe if I come to you first with that one.
Yeah, of course. I think operational resilience isn't going anywhere globally. I think it's definitely a trend that's coming along, and I think businesses need to really kind of adapt their approaches and understand the nuances in expectations, but really think about how they're monitoring and tracking kind of various approaches to OpRes. AI would be remiss of me not to mention it, but AI is really taking shape, and I think positive from maybe start of the year to where we are now is that the regulators are getting abreast of what AI means, because there's always a challenge when new regulation or new typologies are coming out. Firms need to adapt to it. I think we're pretty confident that most businesses are using AI in some sort, but if the regulator doesn't have a stance, it's pretty difficult for us as businesses and industry to understand what's the right side of compliance. And then cross-border payments and instant payments, APP fraud, all kind of picking up pace. I think there's nuances with that, and additionally complexities, adding stable coins into the mix, and how businesses are operating to withdraw funds. They're probably top of the list, and then I guess the bread and butter consumer protection is I think bubbling away across various regions at the moment, and understanding what regulators are taking as a stance point.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive list. But Franz, if I come to you next, is there anything that you would add?
No, I think John covered everything, but I would just like to add more color, right? I think he mentioned AI. I totally agree, right? I think AI, algo governance is going to be a key theme in the near future. Transparency, explainability, bias mitigation. I think they might become formal regulatory requirements for licensed companies. We all know that AI is playing a much bigger role in how payment works. So just take an example, right? I think in the past, when we want to catch fraud, we will set hard code rules, right, to monitor those transactions. But now AI can detect suspicious behavior real time and stop frauds. But if I were to play devil's advocate, how do you know that those transactions that AI stop are indeed fraudulent, right? How do you know that there are no built-in biases in those stoppages, right? Do we even understand, right, what are the rules that AI uses to calculate and then stop those payments? Before we stop those payments, did we even reach out to those payers to verify and ask for further information to check those transactions, right? And then last but not least, how are we going to test to ensure that AI is working fairly and correctly, right? So these are a lot of questions that come to my mind, and I don't have answers to that, but it's really going to be exciting, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real transformation in the way things are operating, and it's got huge potential for tackling fraud in particular, but it has to be done carefully, I think, and mindfully. Kat, is there anything that you would add or any colour you would want to bring in?
I agree with everything that John and friends have said. I think definitely on stablecoins, I mean, just look at the US. It's been headline grabbing for the last couple of months. I think it will continue to be headline grabbing. Another area, like specifically when I think about deepfakes, especially AI, especially for us, it's really focusing on that deepfakes and what is the technology that's going on behind that. So a lot of regulators are coming to us and saying, well, A, how does this even happen? B, what's the technology behind it? How do they go about engineering these deepfakes? And then how can we stop them? So that's been a huge focus that we've seen, less kind of on the consultation side of things, but more just regulators are starting to get more and more interested in that space and reaching out to industry proactively to understand what exactly this is. We're also seeing a huge focus on age verification. I mean, in the UK, we just had the online safety bill come through. We've seen a lot of other regulators are starting to think about, okay, how do we maybe not necessarily copy and paste that, but like how is age verification going to start to play a role in the way that consumers are interacting with purchasing things online? And then we're also seeing, so like for your colleagues on the iGaming side or the gambling side of Vixio, we're also seeing a huge increase in KYC specifically within iGaming. Again, kind of looping in that age verification that we've seen a lot of regulators are asking the iGaming websites to say, well, do we necessarily want younger individuals having access to these games? Do we want to try and monitor that? Are there steps that we can take to increase consumer protection and to increase consumer safety through our platforms by doing more robust KYC, or in some cases just even doing KYC? So I'd say kind of for us, it's really, we're looking at obviously the development of stablecoins, deepfakes, age verification, and then KYC onboarding.
Fantastic. So we're kind of moving towards the end of things. I've got one more question on my list, but if anybody in the audience has any questions, please do let us know, and we'll hopefully have some time to ask those to the panel towards the end. So the last one from me, what are the practical steps that firms should be taking right now to make sure they're keeping pace with all of the changes that we're seeing? Franz, if I come to you first with that one.
I would say invest in a scalable solution, right? Automate it. There's going to be a lot of regulatory changes. And I think we're just going to see the acceleration of those changes. If a business is truly global, manual tracking is not the way to go, right? So invest in the right system. The second thing is build a collaborative culture. Make sure your incentive scheme is set up correctly, right? Make sure that compliance is one of those factors to determine the bonus payments and the promotions announcements, right? Communicate, be it at a formal level, at the steerco level, or below the steerco working group, or even, one-on-ones. I think we cannot overvalue the importance of communications. As Kat mentioned, right, there are pockets of people across the organization which would be expertise in some things you don't know. They might have expertise from their friends or even from their former employers, right? So take advantage of that, right? Be collaborative, and don't foster compliance against distance sort of tension, right? I think it's just one company. We are all in it to grow and to make money. Making money is not something negative, right? We can do it in a compliant way, right?
Absolutely.
And train the business, not just the compliance team. Don't make training boring in the sense that click here, click there, and then just look at the video. I don't like that personally. What I want is interactive sort of training, face to face. And you can see the person, and then the person can give examples that actually relates to the company's business, rather than an example of a bank. If you're in a crypto, for example, it doesn't make sense, right? Or rather, if I'm not in a crypto, I'm in a pure play payments firm, and then the examples are crypto, which again I cannot link it, right? So customize those examples to real life scenarios in the business. And have a clearly defined sort of roles and responsibilities, so that you know this person is accountable for this, right? And so everyone would just work towards the KPIs.
Absolutely. Kat, is there anything that you'd add to that?
I definitely agree with everything that Franz just said. I think also with have a clear but flexible strategy. So when you do get into the really, really busy months, when there's loads of regulatory changes happening, make sure that your team understands, okay, what are our top 3 countries? What are the top 3 regions that we want to focus on? And within those regions, what are the top 3 topics? So, because even in this call, we've mentioned so many different areas of regulation that are developing and that we're all focusing on. Make sure that you as a team clearly understand, okay, yep, my 3 for Singapore are these, my 3 for Kenya are these. So you have that in your head, so you know that when there is this huge rush of regulatory changes, you as a team can actually understand what you need to prioritize on, and exactly what Fran said, then be able to communicate that so people understand and they can say, yep, we understand that there's potentially a consultation happening on consumer protection that we should definitely try and look at and respond to, but right now we really need to focus on these 3 because they are the core crux of our business. So making sure that your strategy is clear but flexible, because some things will change. Regulators could change their position or their focus on something, so you as an organization needs to be able to adapt to that. My other point would just be that you need to make sure, as Fran said, communication is really key. If you don't already have a forum, try and establish a forum where you can have, even if it's just a 30-minute meeting once a month, where you get the relevant people you think you need into a call together to say, okay, here's some things that are coming up that we just want to flag to you that we think could be relevant. Make sure you build that area and that time to have those conversations, because that's where you'll really get a lot of the decisions and you'll get an impact. And you can also then bring people into a conversation that might be really helpful for them. And then finally, I would just say that it's really key, as Fran said, to buy or to invest in a scalable model. So I promise I'm not a paid sponsor of Vixio, but I would highly, highly recommend Vixio, specifically the Horizon scanning tool. I check that minimum probably once a week, if not more than that. It has been incredibly helpful for me as I really start to try and plan and, again, communicate with the relevant teams and say, we know these changes are coming up, or we have a rough estimate of when we think this consultation is going to come out. Here's kind of the actions that we need to take. So really, if you want to save yourself a lot of headaches, a lot of stress, definitely invest in a tool that you can trust and that you can use and will give you the relevant information that you need to make your job 10 times easier.
That's really encouraging to hear that Horizon Scanning is working out for you. John, I guess Kat's just done your job for you. Is there anything else that you would add on how firms should be acting right now?
Yeah, no, for sure, and thanks, Kat and Franz. I think I'll park the Horizon Scanning solution ploy, but I think the only other thing that plays to my mind is firms should consider a regulatory change playbook. So kind of a global playbook, essentially, to say, when a reg change comes in, what's our processes, and building on to what Franz and Kat were saying around the committees. Having a playbook that's adapted and installed locally in terms of what gets done gives a bit of a global divergence. And in those committees, exactly as you both said, if a reg change comes up and it's high on priority, you have a playbook of what looks to be done or what needs to be done, and bringing all the stakeholders onto that journey, I think, is the part, the final part. And I know I mentioned it before, but reg change monitoring needs to be kind of really early on. So if products are developing something and a new reg has come out that actually implicates that, how quickly do they get sight of that is going to be imperative to, one, save money, and two, give you a commercial advantage to be strategic with regulation changes as opposed to being reactive.
Fantastic. So that kind of brings us to the end of the prepared questions. Just before we get into the audience ones, is there anything that anybody on the panel wanted to get across today that we haven't actually touched on yet? That is a positive silence there. We've covered all the bases. Fantastic. So we've got a few audience questions coming in. We'll start with this one here. How can compliance leaders persuade colleagues to engage with compliance proactively rather than seeing it as a blocker? So that's kind of something that we've already touched on today, I think, the sense of trying to embed a compliance culture across the business. Franz, maybe if I put that one to you first, do you have any thoughts that on what compliance should be doing in that area?
Yeah. So I think I think the very nature of compliance attracts people which potentially are more introverted, right? Whereas the extrovert tends to gravitate towards a sales job where a lot of talking is done, right? So aside from the natural tension that exists between your compliance job and a business job, I think there's also some sort of differences in personalities as well, which makes it tough for us to bring together compliance and business. But what I do is I will hold office buffet luncheons. I'll bring them out to nice restaurants. We'll talk nothing about work, just talk about your hobbies, get to know you as a person, bring the introverts out of their shell. I played the middleman, try not to let the extrovert talk too much about themselves. The introverts should also share a bit about themselves, have that sort of balance. Once you get to know your colleagues as human beings first, I think that's when you start to build a rapport and know what they want, what they like, and then everything would then just fall into place. That's my personal experience, right? And it's easier to just start talking. You're chatting about the weather, chatting about a football game, and then from there you can talk about work, right? Start with something fun.
Fantastic. Kat, is there anything that you would add? Any strategies there?
I think just having so what I've done in the past in different roles is reached out proactively to different individuals, go to the sales team. So one of my things is I'm the first person to admit I don't know something. And I think that's something that's really, really useful. And I would recommend across the board people should be doing. And so anytime I join a new company, I always go to the sales team and I'm like, pitch me. Because I want to understand how is it that you're having the conversation about the products that we sell? How do you explain them as someone who's every single day talking about these, demoing them to clients, etc. I always go and say, pitch me. And that also then really helps me because I can understand as I'm looking at, okay, here are our compliance obligations. Here are the potential clients we're speaking to. What are the questions that we're going to be getting? Another thing a tool that I always try and do, especially with the product team, is I look at our product one-pagers and I create ones for regulators. So I say, if I were to try and pitch my KYC product, so for some stuff, if I were to pitch my KYC product to the FCA, this is the type of one-pager. This is the type of information that they would want to see. And then I share that with the sales and the products team. And it actually really helps them to understand, okay, this is how a regulator thinks. This is how they speak. This is what these are their concerns. So it's almost like you teach me, I'll teach you type of approach. And then I always offer office hours. I say, if you guys have any questions at all, there's dedicated time on my calendar where you can just send me a Slack, send me an email, just give me a call and say, hey, I have a really random question and I think you might be able to help. Because I think just really, and like French, you explained it perfectly, just showing that you're open and that, yes, we tend to be more introverted, we tend to be a bit more quiet. But I think by showing that you're open and that you're accessible, a lot of people then kind of overcome that issue of, oh, if I go to compliance, they're just going to say no. Because I always say this to people, I'm like, my answer is never going to be no. My answers might be no, but what if we approached it this way? It's never just no. There's been some instances where it has to legally be just no, but then I always try and say, okay, then let's work together of a solution because I don't want to be that blocker. I don't want to be the one that's always saying no. I want to say we can't do it that way because of these reasons. And I always try and very clearly state the reasons why we can't do something. But then I say, well, okay, let's spend the next hour or let's put in some more time later this week or next week to have more of a strategic conversation and a brainstorm about, we still want to take this relationship or this product forward. So this is how we're going to do it while remaining compliant. And I think having that type of approach that I'm a problem solver, I'm not a blocker, has helped me in my conversations in the past with my different roles, even when I've had to work with individuals who in their head, like, nope, it's Kat, she's the blocker. Like, I think by taking that approach, it's really helped them to better understand that compliance isn't a blocker. They just want to make sure we don't all end up in jail.
Fantastic. John, anything you'd add to those answers?
No, completely agree with both. I think the compliance says no culture is definitely moving on. I think just building on that is probably moving to how as opposed to no, and tying it, as Kat said very rightly, tying it to business outcomes. I think, ultimately the salesperson is thinking about how are they going to score the next sale or build revenue, but compliance kind of moving away from being a blocker and more of a protection mechanism for the business, and quite rightly keeping us out of jail is a valid point and a very true point, looking at the news. But I think building on moving from no to compliance being a how and an enabler, and then also I think us as our jobs as compliance leaders is really thinking about how do we tie our responses back to business outcomes, right? The salesperson has only got one agenda, or the product person has only got a specific agenda in launching a product. When compliance gets involved, I think it's partially an onus on us to think about what's the business outcomes, what are we trying to achieve, and how can compliance be the how to get there scenario as opposed to the no. And quite rightly, there will be times where it will just be a no, but there's always a no but, right? And there's always a solution. It just means a bit more thinking time to ensure we're on the right side of the regs or the right side of compliance. But my takeaway would be that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that again comes back to that piece of working collaboratively with your colleagues and 100%. Having good interpersonal relationships. It's easier to say no buts to people that you're comfortable chatting to. Okay, hopefully that answered the question effectively. It sounded really good to me. Here's the next one. How can firms measure whether changing their compliance processes is actually effective? Kat, maybe we'll come to you first on that one.
I would say, and it's actually one of the reasons, so in the response to the first question, I talked about how we try and reuse as much information as possible for consultation responses. So I think having that type of mechanism of understanding, okay, and noticing those trends globally is to say, has this helped us speed up the process of replying to a consultation response? So for us, that was kind of the measure of success when we introduced the system of kind of tracking and trying to tie all the different relevant consultations so our team could reuse answers. So it was, has this helped to streamline that process? Has it allowed the different subject matter experts? Has it saved them time? Has it made all of that much faster? And luckily, yes, it did help with that. So it's because with compliance stuff, it can sometimes be difficult to really find that measure of success. But when you build a process, something like, okay, where can I reuse consultation responses? It's trying to say it's really just a speed element for us because there's so much things that we're looking at. There are so many topics that we need to cover. We're getting requests from clients. We're getting requests from sales, requests from product. So it's really just understanding, okay, if I set up a process, ultimately the deliverable for a compliance team is, have I delivered the information in a clearer way? And have I done it in a faster and more kind of transparent way as well? So keeping in mind any process that you build, that's kind of the effectiveness scale that you should be looking at, because we never want it to be where we're moving too fast that the advice or that the responses we're providing aren't actually helpful or lead to more questions. So whenever I have a conversation with a product or a sales team, I always go back to them okay, did I answer your questions, or did it result in more follow-up questions? Not ones that are oh, the client wants to okay, that because of your answer, I now have a follow-up question because of the way you answered it. It's more, did you understand my responses? Did you have to come back just to get a better understanding of what I'm actually telling you? So really making sure, and just also self-checking that I'm not using too much jargon. If I am using jargon, I clearly explain what it actually means in this context, things like that. So for me, anytime I look at them, has it helped to speed up the process? So in compliance responses, for example, has it helped to speed up the drafting process? And then when I'm engaging internally, it is more of, have I kind of broken down those barriers? Have I made it clear? Have I communicated clearly? Have I communicated transparently so that they can then better understand it? I can also then better understand and learn from it as well.
Fantastic. Franz, is that the same sort of thing that you would think about in this context?
So on top of faster onboarding, right, less time taken, depend on the changes that compliance processes have done, right? I also look at other things. If it's a procedural change, it doesn't involve speeding up KYC. It could be something that resulted in less complaints, right? So we'll look at before and after, right? Since we put in this change, number of complaints, has it fallen or has it increased? Usually it would have dropped. I also looked at things like the cost of compliance, right? before we put in the change, this was how much we're paying, and after that, has the numbers dropped? And usually, I think we'll see that there's a positive matrix on that, resulting in cost savings. So what I do within Flywire is I have a monthly update where I present to the executive and our headquarters, and I'm very eager to bring in, every month, at least one compliance person from one of the countries in APAC, right, to present and showcase, the changes they've made before and after, how beneficial it has been to the business. Because I think very often compliance don't really market themselves that well. They're doing a lot of good things, but no one recognizes it. And I try to bring them out, presenting to the executive team, and also to show to the executive team the importance of compliance. They should have equal seats on the table, right? Not only the table just can't be dominated by business people. Compliance deserves an equal share.
Absolutely, yeah. John, anything you'd add to that?
Completely agree with all of the points raised. Not much really to add. I think it's more just about it's not just about rolling out a compliance process. I think it will be about testing it beforehand and really thinking about, I guess, metrics on what you're measuring, right? Qualitative, quantitative, and maybe even comparative. If it's regulatory feedback or industry norms, easier said than done, but sometimes doing some benchmarking also helps in terms of if we're rolling out a new process or a new regulation change, what's the industry doing? That's where trade bodies support as well, in terms of just kind of speaking to your peers and understanding what's going on. But I think key is tracking and measuring success. And I think as part of rolling out a new compliance process, we'll be spending the time to think about what does good look like and what's the success measures that we're looking to do, which both of you very well articulated.
Absolutely. Great. We've got time for just one more question and then we'll wrap things up. What quick wins are available for compliance teams aiming to improve their processes? John, maybe if I come to you first on this one.
That's a good question. I think looking at kind of quick or short-term wins will be kind of what I mentioned before, creating like a change playbook, a reg change playbook, essentially creating a framework of what we'll do when something comes in. And I think also just building equity across the business. I think enabling a compliance culture across the business is, as we've said several times, but it's not a compliance says no, but it's a compliance says no, but, or a compliance how culture. And I think, there's medium-term quick wins to that. And one of the things that Franz mentioned in terms of breaking down things into simplistic language is really important, because ultimately, if you're running at 100 miles an hour thinking about closing a sale or creating a new product, we don't need to work at the same pace as them, but we need to be enabling them to get to the right answers, but also giving them jargon in that moment in time is probably going to be an area of contention, as opposed to kind of sitting down and understanding customer outcomes, business outcomes, compliance requirements, and then finding a solution. But I think for me, it'll be the frameworks and building out playbooks that the business are integrated with. And I really like the points around committees. I think committees are going to be really important. And I think it's not just compliance people that should be in the committees. I think raising that tone from the top and also laterally across the business to understand what pain points are.
Fantastic. Franz, any quick wins that you would highlight?
Yeah, I think, build in flexibility, right, within the processes. Move from check the box exercise to really thinking through, going to basics, thinking through why are there certain controls in place, right? What is the principle or thinking behind it? I think once you do that, you'll see several quick wins. One specific example that I can think of is, in terms of onboarding a client. Let's say, the current policy of a company is, the passport has to be, at least valid for at least 6 months. And then you will see that there are some clients which, just past due by 1 month, 2 months, right? Assuming, all the checks are done properly, there's nothing wrong with it. are you really going to go back and ask the client to give us an updated passport? It doesn't make sense, right? The very reason why we ask for a passport of 6 months validity is make sure that, he's a citizen of good standing, right? He's not illegal immigrant or anything like that. But there are other ways around it, to verify that status. You don't have to go through the lazy way of asking for a passport that is valid for 6 months, right? So either build in the flexibility, have compliance team verify it through different sources, or get a senior compliance person to give an exceptional approval, provided everything checks out, the client's low risk and blah blah blah, all these different things, right? So that's my advice. That you'll see a lot of low hanging fruits out there.
Fantastic. And Kat, just to come to you finally, any more quick wins that you can recommend?
I think one of the quick wins that I did when I first joined was to create a Confluence page, or whatever intranet you use for your individual company. Just create a one-stop shop page, and on that it included little intros and bios about myself, the rest of the team, just so people kind of, as Franz was saying earlier, just start to build that more personal relationship, to see that we're not robots. But then also it included things, and this took a bit longer, but it's still, I would say, a quick win in the sense that it was having a couple of conversations with people and saying, what are the number one questions that the sales team goes to you about? What's the number one question you get from product? And creating almost like a self-serve. So a lot of those questions were things like, oh, can we have a copy of our company's house number? Can we have a copy of our latest financial records? Things like that. It's like, create almost a self-service function within compliance, so that way when you are getting those common questions from sales or from product or from the team that completes RFPs, they know that they can go somewhere within the kind of pre-approved compliance space and answer their own questions and get that relevant information. So it got rid of a lot of those types of kind of repetitive but quick questions that do actually take up a lot of time when you're trying to do a lot of other things. And that time is then freed up for us to do handle the more kind of difficult conversations, or the more kind of really specific one-off scenarios that we need to work on with clients. It allows us to focus on that. So really kind of create this space that the rest of the organization can go to kind of help themselves by also helping you. And then finally also on that page, just include kind of here's how you can contact me. If your preferred method is email, if your preferred method is Slack, just include that so people know that if they can't answer their questions through the self-service section, they know how to contact you and they know how to reach out to you. Or if you have office hours, put those on there so they know that they can kind of book a slot at your next office hours session. So it's a quick one because it just allows you to better organize it, but also it allows you to kind of let the team kind of train themselves, let the team take action and do their own thing so they can do that kind of self-serve compliance side of things.
Fantastic. Well, that was a really thorough answer, and it was a really thorough conversation as well. So hopefully that's been really helpful to everybody watching and listening. So as we draw it to a close, it's just left for me to thank the panel. So thank you very much to Franz, Kat, and to John. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And with that, I will hand back.
As we wrap up today's Vixio Strategy Booster session, we'll leave you with 4 comprehensive takeaways to put into action right away. Number 1, automate horizon scanning. Invest in a scalable automated solution to minimize the risk of missing a regulatory update and track regulatory developments weekly. Use horizon scanning tools to monitor consultation, implementation timelines, and national deviations. Number 2, create a compliance hub. Build a one-stop space on your organization's intranet that introduces your compliance team, provides some FAQs to help answer common questions, and shares contact details for your team members. This will improve accessibility and foster for a collaborative compliance culture. Number 3, create a regulatory change playbook to establish and standardize procedures. And number 4, set up compliance committees. Establish committees for clear communication and to encourage a collaborative culture that repositions compliance as an enabler rather than a blocker. We hope these insights help you boost your strategy and bring fresh momentum to your compliance efforts. Stay tuned for the next session in our series. Once again, thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar.